Vlad III of Wallachia is one of the most feared names in history, not for conquest or political power, but for the way he used fear to control and punish. Known today as Vlad the Impaler, his reign was marked not by victories, but by how far he was willing to go to keep order and eliminate threats. Vlad ruled during a chaotic time in Eastern Europe. The Ottoman Empire was expanding into Christian lands, and violence was common. Still, even by the standards of the 1400s, Vlad stood out. He didn't just punish his enemies. He turned punishment into a spectacle designed to terrify anyone who dared oppose him. To understand why he ruled this way, you need to understand his world. Wallachia, his homeland, sat between powerful empires. Its rulers were often caught between choosing the Ottomans or the Hungarians, and those who made the wrong choice didn't last long. Vlad's own father had been killed, and his brother tortured, both victims of the shifting alliances and betrayals of time. Vlad had spent years as a political hostage in the Ottoman Empire, where he saw firsthand how fear kept people in line. Public executions were common and brutal. From this, he learned that harsh punishment could stop rebellion before it started. When Vlad finally took the throne in 1456, he inherited a broken country. Civil war had torn it apart, and the nobles had a history of undermining or killing their rulers, including Vlad's own father. Most leaders would try diplomacy. Vlad chose a different route. His most infamous method was impalement. This wasn't a quick death. It was designed to be slow, painful, and public. Victims were placed on blunt wooden stakes in a way that kept them alive for hours or even days. He often arranged the bodies in patterns outside cities or along roads to send a clear message. This is what happens if you cross me. But that was only one of many tactics. Historical accounts describe other gruesome punishments, including skinning, boiling, and crushing bones. Vlad made sure these acts were seen and remembered. One event in 1459 stands out. He invited local noble families to an Easter feast. Many of these guests had played a role in his father's death. During the meal, he gave a speech about forgiveness. Then, at his signal, his guards arrested everyone. The older nobles were executed on the spot. The younger ones were marched to his fortress, where they worked as forced laborers building what would become his stronghold. Many didn't survive. Those who did were never free again. This single act wiped out an entire class of political opponents and showed that old protections no longer applied. Word spread fast. Ambassadors, merchants, and travelers began approaching Wallachia with extreme caution. Some were spared not out of mercy, but so they could spread tales of what they saw. One German merchant described arriving in the city of Targovist to find a main square filled with hundreds of impaled bodies. The stench was so strong, his group had to cover their faces just to breathe. Another report said Sultan Mehmed II, the powerful Ottoman ruler who had taken Constantinople, turned his army back after encountering a field of 20,000 impaled soldiers. He reportedly said he couldn't fight a man who seemed more terrifying than the devil himself. Even diplomats weren't safe. One Hungarian representative said Vlad made him eat dinner while watching prisoners die outside the window. When the guests complained about the smell, Vlad offered, perhaps seriously, to have him impaled higher up where the air was better. These weren't random acts. Vlad used fear as a tool of power. By making examples of people, he reduced corruption, stopped uprisings, and scared off enemies. Impalement worked as both punishment and warning. The dead stayed visible for weeks, and travelers carried the stories far beyond Wallachia's borders. His reign showed that reputation could be just as effective as armies or money. By creating an image of a ruler who couldn't be crossed, Vlad controlled his land with fewer battles and fewer soldiers. He targeted specific groups, like disloyal nobles, dishonest traders, and hostile outsiders, with punishments that were hard to forget. While many viewed him as cruel, others saw him as a strong leader who kept order in a dangerous time. The same man who inspired horror stories in the West was seen by some in Eastern Europe as a protector who did what was necessary. In the end, Vlad's story is a powerful example of how fear can be used to rule, and how far one man went to make sure no one challenged his authority again. Vlad ruled not just through military might, but through fear. By terrifying potential rebels into submission, he avoided the huge cost of running a large army or building fortresses. Fear worked as a silent enforcer. He didn't have to pay it, feed it, or command it. It just worked. But over time, this approach created serious problems. His absolute rule led to complete isolation. His advisors were too scared to speak honestly. Allies didn't trust him. The public lived in fear of punishment, even when they did nothing wrong. Without trust or cooperation, his government couldn't function normally. One of Vlad's most infamous moments came in 1462. He invited a group of Ottoman diplomats to his court. These weren't just any visitors. They were representatives of Sultan Mehmed II, coming to discuss taxes and territory. When they refused to remove their turbans out of religious custom, Vlad pretended to be understanding. Then, in a shocking twist, he had their turbans nailed to their skulls. Afterward, they were executed and left on display near the road to the Ottoman Empire, a gruesome message to any other envoys. There was no safety in diplomacy. This act broke all rules of international conduct. Killing diplomats was one of the gravest offenses, and Vlad made it brutal and public. The Ottomans couldn't ignore it. Mehmed II, one of the most powerful leaders of the time, launched a full-scale military campaign against Wallachia. The conflict that followed pushed Vlad to take his cruelty to new levels. As the Ottoman army advanced, Vlad burned his own land, poisoned wells, and repopulated destroyed villages with the bodies of the impaled, creating horrific illusions of life. What looked like a village from afar turned out to be a trap of corpses. Even food stores were replaced with mutilated bodies. His goal wasn't to win a battle. It was to break enemy morale. In a bold move, Vlad led a nighttime raid straight toward the Sultan's tent. He didn't succeed in killing Mehmed, but he made his point. Even the Sultan wasn't safe. As Vlad's men retreated, they captured hundreds of Ottoman soldiers and impaled them along the roads back to the enemy camp. The screams of the dying could be heard by their comrades, shaking the army's resolve. Some Ottoman soldiers reportedly deserted rather than march deeper into Wallachia, calling it the devil's country. Vlad's tactics slowed the enemy's progress and disrupted their supply lines. Even support crews were too afraid to enter his territory. Word spread fast, and recruitment for the campaign suffered. But this ruthless style of warfare came at a cost. By the end of 1462, Vlad had no real allies left. Many of his local supporters were dead or had fled. Trade collapsed. The people lived in fear of his next order. Even his longtime ally, the King of Hungary, began to view him as a liability. Reports of Vlad's cruelty were now too much to ignore. Eventually, Hungary had enough. Vlad was arrested, not for war crimes, but because he had become a political problem. He was imprisoned for 12 years. Even though it was labeled protective custody, the message was clear. No one, not even allies, could support him anymore. During his time in prison, stories about Vlad spread across Europe. Printing presses in Germany churned out dramatic accounts of his cruelty, some exaggerated, but many based on real witness reports. These stories slowly turned Vlad from a brutal ruler into a dark legend. He was no longer just a man. He was becoming a symbol of evil. That legend would later inspire Bram Stoker's fictional vampire, Dracula. Vlad returned to power briefly in 1476, but the world had changed. His name still carried fear, but it no longer paralyzed his enemies. His tactics had lost their shock value. He died in battle that same year, surrounded by enemies and without the loyalty he had once commanded. His influence, though, didn't end there. Vlad's legacy has impacted everything from political theory to modern horror. His reign showed how cruelty can work in the short term, but it destroys everything in the long run. He got rid of his enemies, stopped invasions, and kept power for over a decade. But it came at the cost of his society's soul. Trade died, trust disappeared, and the people lived in fear. Some modern dictators have studied his methods, drawn to how effective they were, but they also see the limits. A government built on fear eventually collapses under its own weight. The story of Vlad the Impaler challenges us to face hard questions. What happens when someone decides fear is more powerful than law? What does it mean when cruelty becomes a strategy, not just a crime? Vlad wasn't a mindless monster. He made calculated choices. He understood human psychology and used that knowledge to control, intimidate, and dominate. That's what makes his story so disturbing. He wasn't irrational. He was deliberate. And that's why his legacy still haunts us. Today, scholars still study Vlad's rule, not just for the history, but for what it reveals about human nature. His reign shows how people can survive under extreme terror, and how societies react to constant fear. It also shows the line between power and corruption, how easily it can be crossed, and how hard it is to walk back. In the end, Vlad the Impaler forces us to ask a haunting question. When does a man become a monster? And how far will we go under pressure to protect what we believe is ours? Vlad the Impaler's legacy is more than a tale of brutality. It's a study in the dangerous power of fear and what happens when violence becomes a core of leadership. His reign achieved its immediate goals. Enemies backed down, rebellion vanished, and for a time, order held. But the cost was immense. By ruling through terror, Vlad hollowed out his own kingdom, killing trust, stifling trade, and isolating himself from potential allies. What started as a strategy to protect his homeland ended up turning it into a prison ruled by fear and silence. What makes Vlad's story so gripping isn't just a horror. It's a fact that much of it was planned, not impulsive. He understood people better than most rulers of his time. He knew what would break them. That's what makes his legacy chilling. He chose his path, fully aware of its effects. And while his name still sparks fascination centuries later, his story remains a warning. Vlad reminds us that fear can be powerful, but it can't build anything that lasts. The structures of terror always collapse, taking everything with them. Power without conscience isn't strength. It's a countdown to self-destruction. Today, his story challenges us to look closer at the leaders we choose, the values we uphold, and the cost of silence in the face of cruelty. In a world that still struggles with abuses of power, Vlad's life stands as a harsh reminder. Strength without morality doesn't make a ruler great. It makes him unforgettable for all the wrong reasons.